Hola, hola, live, baby. We are live. Da, 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 da. I need to take a selfie. All right, guys, let's go live. I'm posting that I'm live. How is everyone doing? Sorry for the delay. All right, so check this out, y'all. We need to finish. I've got library books to return, y'all. I've had this freaking for almost 2 months and I haven't finished reading it. But we're gonna do it today, man. I'm gonna go hard. We're on page 144. I gotta get to like page 180. We can do this because a lot of them has like illustrations on it and stuff. So, well, I want to welcome you guys in. Game Dot Film is live, live baby, live. So, guys, I'm anti-capitalist. I'm anti-imperialist. I like learning about, how the oppressors are oppressing us, and this is the last part of The Warehouse, a visual primer on mass incarceration by James Kilgore and Bic Liu. We left off on page 144. This is the title is Producing Newspapers in Prison. The previous pages, they were talking about how to make makeup in jails, prisons, how to make art low key, how to make chess pieces, what people do in their spare time. We learned about hunger strikes. Yeah, but now, yeah. Let's continue. The Warehouse, a visual primer on mass incarceration. So, in producing newspapers in prison. The first prison newspaper, called The Forlorn Hope, hit the presses in 1800 in New York. The pinnacle of prison newspapers was the 1930s to 1950s, when rehabilitation was the dominant paradigm. By 1959, there were 250 prison newspapers. Then came mass incarceration, and the number dwindled to less than a dozen by the early 21st century. But as awareness of mass incarceration grew, prison newspapers experienced a rebirth. In 2004, people in an Illinois prison, Stateville, launched Stateville Speaks, which continued to publish right up until the pandemic. In 2008, San Quentin News also resurfaced, and it became the most widely read prison newspaper in the country. The success of prison newspapers has spread to other media. Ear Hustle, a podcast produced in San Quentin, has had over 40 million downloads. Miguel Quezada, a former managing editor at the San Quentin News, didn't realize he was a juvenile lifer, a person sentenced to life for an offense committed when they were under 18, until he was researching a story on juvenile justice for the paper. Ultimately, Quezada got his sentence shortened. He paroled in 2018 and became an active advocate for criminal justice transformation and the release of people serving life sentences for offenses committed when they were under 18. Quote by Dorothy Maraglino, an incarcerated writer who, among other things, has written about the experience of being graped in prison. I say graped because I don't know. YouTube and stuff's weird. Quote, it is important for incarcerated people to have a writing outlet because the system is designed to silence us. Writing is often the only way we can speak. People should read the stories because we are the forgotten population. Quote by Christopher Blackwell, who's incarcerated in Washington State. We are reporting behind enemy lines and constantly writing things they don't want us to. We are always being called liars or being questioned. Prison administrators never are. We always have to show proof, and they don't. Close quote. And here's like, this is dark, dude, in the YouTube chat. Yeah, man, I know, but you know, I don't know, man. I like showing you this is what capitalism does, man. So we gotta discuss the hard stuff. So let's go on the next page. Prison profiteers. I was on the next page. U.S. mass incarceration is worth approximately $182 billion annually. The era of mass incarceration has seen the enormous expansion of corporate involvement in the world of prisons, jails, pretrial justice, parole, and probation. Historically, prisons and the services tied to the prison industry have been under the authority of the state. The workers in the prison industrial complex, whether it be wardens, guards, cooks, or admin personnel, were almost all state employees. However, mass incarceration arose in the era of neoliberalism, the time when government policies and budgets promoted the expansion of the private sector. Likely the most high profile corporate players in the prison industry are the private prison operators. Two companies dominate the private prison sector, the CEO Group and CoreCivic. These two companies have similar profiles. Not only do they own prisons, but they also have interest in immigration detention centers, private probation and parole programs, electronic monitoring, and other services. The GEO Group has shown remarkable growth. From 2001 to 2021, their annual revenue grew from $560 million to $2.25 billion. CoreCivic showed a similar pattern, expanding from $900 million in 2001 to $1.85 billion in 2021. Yet for all the attention paid to private prisons, they only own or operate about 8% of the prison beds in the U.S. The remainder are run by state authorities. The number of people held in private prisons increased by only 14% from 2000 to 2020. They are of marginal importance in the overall picture. The use of private prisons varies greatly from state to state. 22 states have no private prisons, while Montana holds half of its prison population in private prisons, and New Mexico holds 45% in a for-profit institution. While the GEO Group and CoreCivic are the largest players in the private prison market, other lesser players such as Management and Training Corporation and LaSalle Corrections also operate in this sector. Private prisons and immigration. While private companies have marginal holdings in the criminal legal system, they are major players in immigration detention. They operate about 80% of immigration prison beds, which supplied a little over a quarter of the company's revenue in 2020. In states like Louisiana and Texas, the state authorities closed private prisons, which the companies then refilled with immigrants. Damn. And then in a little tidbit at the bottom of this page, I'll show you U.S. government spending on incarceration surpassed $89 billion in 2012. So you can kind of get. Is that a date right there? 1987. God damn it! I suck at this. Can you see that? 52 billion in 1992. 97, 64 billion. Sorry, that's horrible. But you get the picture. In 2012, 89 billion. Private sector players. Look at this, guys. That's Nutriloaf. I'll read the caption in a second. It's disgusting. Private sector players. According to the nonprofit organization Worth Rises, there are over 4,000 corporations that profit from investing in incarceration. One of the biggest sources of profit is food. In most prisons, a team of incarcerated people assigned to work in the kitchen prepare the meals. Though expenditures may vary, prisons typically spend a little over $1 per person per meal on food. While no longer consisting of bread and water, as in medieval times, the prison diet generally has low nutrition value. Prison food is about cutting costs. Fresh fruit and vegetables are rare, and use of soy meat substitutes is common. Nutriloaf, also known as lockup loaf or punishment loaf, shows up in many prison chow halls. This concoction, composed of a variety of ingredients, has been the subject of lawsuits in at least 6 states, in which litigants declared it cruel and unusual punishment. A Washington court ruled that Nutriloaf was punishment, though not cruel and unusual. Nutriloaf. The loaf is often given to imprisoned people who misbehave day after day. Prisons are allowed to come up with their own version, so these bland loaves can contain anything from leftovers to shredded vegetables. Look at that, dude. I'm gonna puke. Nutriloaf. In some prisons, private companies run the kitchen, providing both the food and the workforce. Aramark possesses 38% of the market share of the prison food industry. It has been providing food service to prisons since 1976 and currently provides food to more than 500 prisons and jails. Aramark was a primary target in 2017 of hunger strikers in Alabama prisons. There was documented evidence and numerous complaints from incarcerated people of being served rotten meat, food infested with maggots, food that had been nibbled by rats, and food pulled from the trash. In response to Aramark's association with prisons and a number of legal actions brought against them by incarcerated people, students in many colleges where Aramark provides food service have protested against their university's contract with the company. Several universities, including New York University, Kent State, and the University of Mississippi, severed their contracts with Aramark. Guys, boycotting works, y'all. 75% of survey respondents said they were served rotten or spoiled food while they were incarcerated. There was just a little tidbit there. Prison phones. Prison phone calls have been a major source of profits for private companies like Securus and GTL. This is a sector where the shift from public operation to private providers has been very costly to incarcerated people and their loved ones. These companies have been the target of national and state level campaigns to eliminate excessive tariffs on phone calls from people in prison to their loved ones on the outside. Before the campaign for prison phone justice put an end to some of this overcharging, people in certain prisons were paying as much as $15 for a 15-minute phone call. Moreover, the contracts between the companies and the Department of Corrections contained kickbacks, meaning that a certain percentage of the revenue from phone calls would be given back to the prisons. In the state of Illinois, 85% of that revenue went to kickbacks. Through a national campaign that involved incarcerated people and their loved ones, the price of phone calls decreased dramatically in many states in the federal system. In Illinois, the cost of a phone call went from $1 a minute to a penny a minute, thanks to state legislation driven by activists and engaged legislators. Nonetheless, companies in many states continue to overcharge. In 2020, the average cost of a 15-minute phone call was $5.74. The total revenue for the prison and telecom industry was $1.4 billion. It would take 11 hours of working at the average maximum wage for a non-industry job in prison to pay for a 15-minute phone call. JPay charges 47 cents for each email. That's 5 hours of prison wages. Securus, carceral conglomerate. Securus, which is SECURUS, if you want to look it up. Securus can be called a carceral conglomerate, meaning that they have a number of holdings in the prison industrial complex. My friend in the YouTube chat says it's just the Matrix. I found out I have ants. Yeah, let me know if you need help with that. I can give you tips. Excuse me. Securus can be called a carceral conglomerate, meaning that they have a number of holdings in the prison industrial complex. Not only do they provide prison phone systems, they also supply video visitation equipment, email systems for prisons and jails, and data management systems for departments of corrections. They also provide tablet devices to over 100,000 incarcerated people and sell content for those devices. They claim to serve over 3,400 correctional facilities across the U.S. Outside of prisons, they are the owners of satellite tracking of people, one of the largest providers of electronic monitoring devices in the U.S. In 2015, Securus bought JPay, an online platform for people to pay bills and fines to departments of corrections, law enforcement, and other prison profiteers. As of 2022, Securus was owned by the private equity firm Platinum Equity. Securus is often accused of charging exorbitant fees in order to increase profits at the expense of incarcerated people. Until November 2019, Securus sold incarcerated people books at high prices that they obtained freely from Project Gutenberg. Quote from Roger, who's been incarcerated in New York for 15 years, quote, JPay knows that we are a captive consumer base and we have no choice, close quote. Next page. Healthcare merchants of death. The neoliberal era has featured the privatization of healthcare in prisons. Companies like Corizon, Wexford, Napcare, and WellPath have replaced state-run services across the country in both prisons and jails. In many places, privatization has come with copays, meaning that incarcerated people, even if they have little or no income, have to pay a fee to see a medical staff person. Privatized prison healthcare often leads to an abysmal decline in care. Multiple sources report instances of failure to diagnose treatable illnesses, often resulting in long-term impact and sometimes death, as well as horrifying stories of neglect to the point of cruelty. Sorry if this gets dark, but research by Reuters into the quality of care by private providers has shown that in many instances, results are problematic. A review of deaths in more than 500 jails from 2016 to 2018 found that the facilities that relied on a private healthcare provider had death rates 18 to 58% higher than jails where the sheriff's office or local public health departments was the provider. Because the only form of redress available to incarcerated people and their families is through the court, these issues have led to frequent lawsuits. Corizon was sued over 1,300 times between 2011 and 2016. Here's a picture of dentures there. Dentures are often denied to people in prison. Many incarcerated people are not provided with dentures, even if they are missing all of their teeth. Chewing is not considered a medical necessity to many prisons. Jeez. A quote from Todd Wilcox. Testifying as the expert witness in the court case of Parsons versus Ryan, which the ACLU brought against the Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehab, and Reentry, ADCRR, regarding the medical care provided to incarcerated people under its contract with Corizon. Quote, doctors, NPs, and nurses repeatedly and over many months abdicated their responsibility to care for a sick and dying patient and permitted him to die in pain. Close quote. Notice of impending death. Walter Jordan submitted this letter announcing his impending death under the inadequate medical care of Arizona's Department of Corrections to the court case of Parsons versus Ryan. His death 8 days later was deemed likely preventable by expert witness Dr. Todd Wilcox. This is pretty dark, man. So this is what I just read. Here's a photo of this. Let's read. This is kind of sad, but we have to do it. ADOC and Corizon delayed treating my cancer. Now, because of their delay, I may be likely to be alive for 30 days. The delayed treatment they gave me is causing memory loss, pain. Too many inmates in East Unit have the same issue. Weathers, Jensen, Figueroa, Tripathi, Ortiz, Trichet, Richards, etc. All these are inmates denied treatment by Corizon, among others, and all falling, yelling, screaming of pain. Walter Jordan, 078789. Sorry, man, that was dark, dude. That was really sad. But gotta read it, guys, because this is what capitalism is. This is what I'm trying to just to get that light turned on in you, man, to look up these corporations, see why, people are profiting off mass incarceration in ways I just didn't know, the food industry, the medical for profit industry. Um, so, and I'm gonna read a bunch of like stuff where you can write letters to people or like help pitch in and stuff. So you can be active. All right, prison labor, page 154. Across the USA, incarcerated workers produce more than 2 billion a year in goods and over 9 billion a year in maintenance of the prisons where they are held. All right. Because of the 13th Amendment, incarcerated people have no right to refuse or choose what labor they are forced to do. Over 76% of incarcerated workers report that they are not able to refuse working and, if they do so, can be punished with solitary confinement, loss of visitation rights, or loss of opportunities to reduce the length of their sentence, or must work in order to afford basic necessities. Though much public focus is on the use of prison labor by private companies, in reality, these non industry jobs are in the minority, with only about 6,000 people in prisons under any kind of contract to private companies. The majority of incarcerated labor occurs within the prison industry. In most institutions, the incarcerated population is responsible for the day to day operations. They cook, clean, serve meals, do paperwork for administrators, and carry out the basic maintenance such as plumbing, painting, building repair. The pay rates for this work range from no pay at all in states like Texas to a few cents an hour in California. Slavery, labor, and the 13th Amendment. Many incarcerated people and activists have targeted the 13th Amendment as a farcical initiative. Technically, it was supposed to end slavery, but the wording of the amendment, which states, quote, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the U.S. or any place subject to their jurisdiction, close quote, clearly allows for the use of people in prison as enslaved labor. In 2022, 5 states added a measure on the ballot to eliminate that slavery clause. The measure passed in 4 states: Alabama, Tennessee, Vermont, and Oregon. Louisiana voters rejected the change. Nebraska, Utah, and Colorado had previously passed such legislation. Apart from the major services mentioned here, over 3,100 companies extract profits from various sources related to prisons and jails. Some of these include bail bond companies, which collect $1.4 billion in non-refundable fees every year, prison commissary vendors, which infamously inflate prices and take advantage of their captive market and pull in $1.6 billion every year, and companies that collect fees on transferring money to incarcerated people, which historically could be performed with mailing a money order. In 2014, JPay collected an average fee of 10% for money transfers, earning a revenue of $53 million. An incarcerated worker earns, on average, between 14 cents and 63 cents each hour at 94% of prison jobs. How Big House Products makes boxer shorts. Pennsylvania Correctional Industries forces incarcerated people to make boxers for little pay. These boxers are then sold back to them through the prison commissary. Yeah, and there's like a weird illustration there. It's kind of messed up. Yeah, I don't want to. Might look a little graphic here. Part 3: Dismantling the system, building anew. Check it out. Here we got another photo there. Close Rikers now. No new jails. The movement against mass incarceration. In the past decade, political awareness about the excessive use of incarceration in the U.S. has grown exponentially. People have come together in hundreds of organizations and campaigns to try to bring about change. This work has taken many forms. Efforts to change sentencing laws, especially those related to drugs. Attempts to halt the building of new prisons and jails or close existing facilities. Lawsuits against inhumane treatment of people who are incarcerated. Campaigns to reduce the charges on prison phone calls or for goods in the commissaries. Mobilizations by formerly incarcerated people to transform the system. Yeah, so on the previous page, this was an NYC Mayor Bill de Blasio planned to open 4 new jails, and this was no new jails protest. That's kind of like what that was. So, all right. Reducing the prison population. The number of people incarcerated in the U.S. peaked in 2009 at around 2.4 million. Between that peak and 2019, this figure declined by 11%. All but 4 states reduced their prison population during that time. But for 25 states, the reduction was less than 10%. While this seems significant, at this rate, it would take 57 years to cut the U.S. prison population in half. This would still leave the U.S. with a higher per capita rate of incarceration than the current rate of any European country. Several factors led to this decline in prison population. Sentencing reform reduced the penalty for certain offenses and created mechanisms for people behind bars to gain early release. And the decriminalization of marijuana in many states also contributed to less people behind bars. These and other changes have been the product of advocacy and mobilization by elected officials, nonprofit orgs, and faith-based groups, and the initiative of organizations led by formerly incarcerated people. The replacement of incarceration by programs that administer less severe punishment than jail or prison has contributed to reducing the number of people behind bars. For example, many jurisdictions have set up drug courts where individuals charged with drug offenses are mandated to go to drug treatment programs rather than jails or prisons. The relaxation of regulations for parole and supervised release also slowed down the revolving door that sent many people back to prison. In many states, the length of parole terms has been shortened, or the penalty for technical violations of the rules, like missing a meeting with the parole officer or coming home after curfew, has been moderated, reducing the number of people sent back to prison simply for breaking the often irrational rules that govern parole and probation. Where is this happening? The reductions in prison and jail populations have not been uniform. Nearly a third of the population reductions between 2010 and 2020 took place in 2 states, New York and California. Each of these states reduced their prison populations by over 25%. These reductions came about primarily by reductions in penalties for drug offenses and cutbacks for violations of parole regulations. California's reduction was also accelerated by a federal intervention targeted at reducing the overcrowding in a system that was at over 200% capacity, as well as a moderation of the use of 3 strikes laws. By contrast, during this period, 5 states increased their total prison population. In 4 states, West Virginia, Alaska, Nebraska, and Arkansas, saw an uptick in their per capita incarceration rate. The path of reform, page 164. The increased awareness of mass incarceration and the reduction in prison populations did not occur by accident. Rather, across the country, grassroots orgs emerged to lead campaigns for change. So, if you guys want to talk about trying to do something, here we go. Drug Policy Alliance. The Drug Policy Alliance is a coalition of organizations and individuals that has been active in campaigns around the country and even internationally to legalize and or decriminalize drugs and end the war on drugs. As of 2022, they had 12,000 dues-paying members. In over 2 decades of operation, they have had numerous victories, playing a leading role in establishing the first overdose prevention center, OPC, in the U.S. in New York City. OPCs are safe injection sites that supply people with clean needles and supervision in case of a medical emergency. There are over 200 OPCs worldwide, spearheading campaigns to change drug laws, including the decriminalization of marijuana in 26 states, plus the District of Columbia. In 2020, the DPA, Drug Policy Alliance, played a major part in backing the campaign in Oregon that passed Measure 110, the first measure that decriminalized all drugs in the state. The Drug Policy Alliance has also advocated for lower budgets for policing the war on drugs, for the elimination of police in schools, and for ending the militarization of police and the use of no-knock warrants, which often lead to attacks on innocent people. Quote, from Cassandra Frederique, an executive director of Drug Policy Alliance. Quote, "The drug war is a manifestation of the things that we have failed at. How do we have a conversation about alternatives?" Close quote. From Michelle Alexander, author of The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. Quote, "Formerly incarcerated people have provided us with a counter-narrative that the system wasn't actually working as advertised, and that the human cost and the human tolls was beyond anything that had been communicated to us." Close quote. Organizations of impacted people. FIC-PFM, formerly incarcerated convicted people and families movement. Individuals who have experienced incarceration have come together across the country to speak on their own behalf. An important early effort in this regard came from the New York-based Center for New Leadership, whose founder, Eddie Ellis, wrote a piece for the New York Times that rejected the notion of referring to people who had been incarcerated as convicts, criminals, or other such dehumanizing terms. On the West Coast, All of Us or None, founded in Oakland, California in 2003, brought together formerly incarcerated people in the Bay Area. They kicked off their program by launching the Ban the Box campaign, an effort to exclude any questions about a person's criminal record from job applications. Their efforts have paid off. Today, over 33 states and 150 cities have passed Ban the Box laws or ordinances. Nice. In 2011, All of Us or None joined with other organizations of formerly incarcerated people, such as the Ordinary People Society, Alabama, Voices of the Experience, VOTE, New Orleans, and A New Way of Life, Los Angeles, to form a national organization, the Formerly Incarcerated Convicted People and Families Movement. They united around a 14-point platform to end mass incarceration, halt immigration detention, and establish equality for all people. By 2022, FIC-PFM had over 50 organizational members from across the country. In every quarter, they advanced the notion that impacted people must have a powerful voice in a full restoration of all rights, including the right to vote while incarcerated. They encapsulated this in the slogan, "Nothing about us without us is for us." Here's another org. The National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. Founded by people incarcerated in the Women's Federal Prison in Danbury, Connecticut, in 2010, the council has taken on the mission to end the incarceration of women's rights. Where am I? I just lost what I was reading. Let's start over. Sorry. Founded by people incarcerated in the Women's Federal Prison in Danbury, Connecticut in 2010, the council has taken on the mission to, quote, "end the incarceration of women and girls," close quote. The council blends national campaigns to bring clemency to people locked up in women's prisons and hyper-local work, such as setting up mutual aid programs in impacted communities during the pandemic. In 2022, they launched a basic income grant program, the Community Love Fund, to materially support women harmed by the criminal legal system. The council also builds ties with women incarcerated in other countries and has formal connections with their sisters in 21 countries in Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, and Australia. Here's another. Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Up until 2019, anyone with a felony conviction in Florida could not vote. This prevented 1.4 million people from exercising their franchise. The Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, led by Desmond Meade, a formerly incarcerated individual, put forward an amendment to the state constitution to restore the voting rights of Floridians with felony convictions after they complete all terms of their sentence, including parole or probation. The coalition members traveled across the state of Florida and collected more than 760,000 signatures in support of what became known as Amendment 4. On election night, 64% of voters supported the measure, restoring voting rights to all those with felony convictions who have completed their sentence, except to those convicted of murder or certain sex offenses. However, once Amendment 4 passed, Governor Ron DeSantis undercut its impact by pushing through a clause that compelled all people with felony convictions to pay any money they owed for fines before they can get their votes restored. Advocates of Amendment 4 fought back by fundraising to collect the money to pay off those fines. Michael Bloomberg, a billionaire Republican CEO, contributed $16 million to the fund. Michael Bloomberg? No way. Despite the triumph of Amendment 4, the denial of voting rights to people with the background still persists. Even after the passage of Amendment 4, over 900,000 people in Florida still could not vote due to felony convictions. As of 2022, 4.6 million people still could not vote in the U.S. due to criminal convictions. 1 in 19 black people are denied the vote due to their criminal history, 3.5 times higher than the rate for non-black people. Maine and Vermont are the only states where people in prison can vote. Research. One, awareness of the criminal legal system has been greatly enhanced by research. A number of think tanks specialize in researching the prison industrial complex and producing recommendations for change. Among the most important of these are the Sentencing Project, the Vera Institute, and the Brennan Center. Nonprofit activist orgs have also contributed to this body of work. Critical Resistance, Survived and Punished, Black and Pink, HEARD, that's in all caps, and the Community Justice Exchange are a few of the most important. Each year, the Prison Policy Initiative produces a graphic called The Whole Pie, which depicts the number of people incarcerated in the U.S. and what type of institution they are held in. Okay. Reform versus abolition. So it's a photo here. A prison room, cell. The struggle against mass incarceration has sparked great debates about the most effective approach to change the criminal legal system. Some individuals argue that the system is broken and must be fixed. They advocate primarily for reforms, for reduced sentences, especially for nonviolent offenses, and to improve the conditions of incarceration. Improve the food, expand educational opportunities, extend visiting hours. These people are generally referred to as advocates for reforming the criminal justice system. Other people argue that the entire system must be eliminated, abolished. They reject the notion that the system is broken and therefore must be fixed. Their view, which is referred to abolition, holds that the system is not broken, but that it is doing exactly what it was set up to do: enforce and perpetuate a racist, exploitative system. So, addiction treatment, schools as places for the joy of learning, mental and emotional health resources, effective welfare, job and living wage programs, domestic abuse support, and community recreation. Here, that's kind of like what they're... Guys, if you take care of your communities, you won't have people put in desperate situations and don't commit crimes. So, yeah, abolition's the way to go. I mean, is it a pipe dream? Let's read more. The reform view. The reform view contends that when people commit a crime, they should be punished. While criminal justice reformers would argue that the U.S. system is far too punitive, they would hold that some people need to be punished or kept out of circulation. Part of their argument would contend that crimes like murder or rape cannot go unpunished, that victims or survivors of such crimes deserve some kind of justice or satisfaction that the person who committed the crime is paying a price. Their priorities to reform the criminal justice system would include measures like legalizing or decriminalizing substances, offering more programs of rehab in prisons, such as college courses and vocational skills, shortening sentences for nonviolent crimes, and giving people in prison time off their sentences for good behavior. Reformers also oppose the death penalty, arguing that it is inhumane. Lastly, reformers would generally support measures to address the racial disparities in the criminal legal system, recognizing that race should not be a factor in determining a person's outcome once they enter the court system. All reformers do not think in exactly the same way. Some favor slow-paced change, reducing prison populations by giving people credits for good time while in prison or slightly moderating sentencing laws. Others would opt for much more drastic cuts to prison budgets and much less harsh sentencing, along the lines of many countries in Europe. Halden Prison Yard. While the grounds are beautiful and covered in trees, the prison wall is visible everywhere. North Dakota Legislative Branch. Just a little photo there. You can see the prison wall there. Halden Prison in Norway. Halden Prison in Norway, frequently called the most humane prison in the world, is often seen as a model for prison reform. Located in a beautifully forested area, Halden has no guards, towers, or razor wire. Walls are painted in soothing colors and decorated with works of art. People incarcerated there have their own cells with a flat screen TV, a fridge, and a microwave. Cells are organized in clusters so that each group of cells shares a common kitchen and social space. The prison includes many activities geared towards rehab, from woodworking to a music studio where people can record music and spoken word. The Norwegian government's prison philosophy holds that the smaller the difference between life inside and outside the prison, the easier the transition from prison to freedom. While this approach has drawn extensive praise from many quarters, a 2021 set of interviews with men incarcerated in Holland revealed that many of them said there was nothing therapeutic about the environment of the prison, despite efforts by authorities to create a welcoming atmosphere. Quote by Gloria Steinem in an argument for a proposed women's jail in Harlem. Quote, at Lincoln, the Women's Center for Justice can use a gender-responsive, trauma-informed care model that breaks the cycle of incarceration, a therapeutic setting that fosters community connections, family unification, and skills building, close quote. The abolitionist view. Abolitionists call for the elimination of all prisons and jails. Rather than using a criminal justice framework, most abolitionists refer to acts of violence or other things that would be considered crimes under existing law as harms. The people involved are the harm doers and the survivors of the harm. They do not believe in using the criminal legal system, or what they often refer to as the criminal punishment system, to address harm. Rather, they advocate for measures that address the root causes of harm, the elements in the system they call racial capitalism, that propel certain people, especially poor black and brown folks, into the prison system. They argue not simply for changes in the criminal legal system, but in the entire system of racial capitalism. While they would fight for certain types of reforms, they would argue that the system cannot be reformed piece by piece. In their view, eliminating mass incarceration requires a transformation of society and an end to structural racism. Quote by Miriam Kaba. Let's begin our abolitionist journey not with the question, what do we have now and how can we make it better? Instead, let's ask, what could we imagine for ourselves in the world? If we do that, then boundless possibilities of a more just world awaits us, close quote. Los Angeles County plus USC Medical Center's Restorative Care Village. The Restorative Care Village aims to provide a continuum of care, including housing, mental health resources, substance use disorder treatment, and transitional aid. The slogan, Care First, Jail Last, was part of the inspiration for this $68.5 million facility, Canon Design. Painting there. Abolitionist presence. The most well-known application of the word abolition is the abolition of slavery. But to enslaved people, abolition was intimately tied with freedom, with building a new life with prosperity and power. Hence, it meant the absence of slavery, but also the creation of free families and free communities. Similarly, the abolition of prisons and jails, while connecting to the absence of these institutions of oppression, is also about a different way of living, creating communities where harm is addressed by making some fundamental changes to the economic, political, and social life of our society. Abolition aims to address what abolitionists perceive as the root cause of harm, the inequitable distribution of resources and power. Instead of prisons that punish, abolitionists advocate directing resources to programs that keep people out of prison and improve quality of life, guaranteed income, accessible and affordable housing, free and relevant education, improved health care, and measures to ensure the survival of the planet. Quote from Ruth Wilson Gilmore: abolition is about presence, not absence. It has to be green, and in order to be green, it has to be red, anti-capitalist. And in order to be red, it has to be international, close quote. The first step, a case study in theories of change. In 2018, President Donald Trump, largely under the influence of entertainer Kim Kardashian, put forward the First Step Act. Passed in 2018 by a bipartisan vote, the First Step Act was an example of a moderate approach to criminal justice reform. The goal of the First Step Act was sentencing reform, in particular, reducing some of the mandatory minimum sentences in the federal system. The act shortened mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenses. It also gave judges more discretion to deviate from the mandatory minimum guidelines. One highly publicized component of the First Step Act was to reduce the disproportionate penalties for crack cocaine as opposed to powder cocaine. The impact of the First Step Act. After 1 year, because of the First Step Act, about 2,000 people received sentence reductions for convictions related to crack cocaine. 342 people were approved for early home confinement, house arrest. 107 people received compassionate release. 2,000 people received good time credits that earned them an early release. In 2019, the federal prison system held just under 180,000 people. Hence, overall, just a few thousand were impacted by the First Step Act. Moreover, more than half of those people incarcerated in the federal system have sentences of 10 years or longer. Over a quarter have more than 15 years. Good time credits will have little effect on these individuals' sentences. Reactions to the First Step Act. Many criminal justice reformers praised the First Step Act. They argued that because it drew support from both Democrats and Republicans, it laid the groundwork for future unity across the aisle for greater change. While not promoting the First Step Act as a panacea for the problems of the system, supporters of the act, like the Pruden Center, described this as a, quote, critical win in the fight to reduce mass incarceration. The largest step the federal government has taken to reduce the number of people in federal custody, close quote. A coalition of over 100 organizations signed a letter in opposition to the First Step Act. They argued that while they supported the intention of the act to reduce penalties in prison populations, it made no real change to existing systems. They maintained the First Step Act would not significantly impact racial disparities or excessively long mandatory minimum sentences, nor address the lack of rehab in federal prisons. They also decried the failure of the act to reduce the cost of incarceration. In short, they argued that it was a cosmetic change that didn't address the structure of the criminal legal system or the ways in which federal budgets prioritize prisons and prosecutions over supportive programs like mental health services, housing support, substance use programs, job creation, and post-prison education. An abolitionist checklist for the First Step Act. While abolitionists call for the elimination of prisons, they recognize this will not happen overnight. In the meantime, they support certain types of reforms, which they label non-reformist reforms. In order to determine whether to support a certain reform, abolitionists check to see if the reform, 1, reduces the incarcerated population, 2, reduces the powers and budgets of the prison industrial complex, 3, does not aid one sector of the impacted population while deepening the punishment of another sector, 4, builds the power of movements fighting for change. Seen through the abolitionist lens, the First Step Act likely would not be labeled a non-reformist reform. The act led to a slight reduction in the incarcerated population, but did little to reduce the power or budgets of the federal prison system, nor did it allocate funds to programs or organizations fighting for change. All right, guys, we're almost done. The campaign to close Rikers, page 176, a case study in theories of change. Rikers Island in NYC is one of the biggest jail complexes in the world. The island houses 10 jails with a total capacity of nearly 15,000 people. Over the years, conditions at Rikers have deteriorated. In 2015, the jail recorded 9,424 assaults. In 2016, a group led by individuals who had been incarcerated at Rikers began to press for the closure of the jail complex. This would become the campaign to close Rikers, which eventually had over 120 organizations as members. Their mobilizations influenced a 2016 study commissioned by the city that recommended the closure of Rikers within 10 years. The challenges that arose from the recommendation to close Rikers prompted enormous debates among those who had been trying for years to address the violence and deteriorating physical conditions in the jail. The campaign carried out incessant activities to get their point across. Their actions played an important part in convincing elected officials that it was time to close the jail complex. In October 2019, the city council voted to close the jail by 2026. But the story didn't end there. The key question that emerged was, what next? The debate over the next steps reflected the differences of opinions among the campaigners. Here's two things. Reformers proposed building a new set of jails. The criminal justice reformers wanted to build a set of new jails to replace the massive Rikers facility. They proposed 4 jails distributed throughout different parts of the city. These jails were to be modern, friendly facilities situated in the communities where those confined on Rikers came from. According to city authorities, these jails were, quote, to foster safety and well-being for both those incarcerated and for the staff, providing space for quality education, health, and therapeutic programming. Modern facilities can also serve as a catalyst for positive change in the community and the broader justice system, close quote. Now, abolitionists. Abolitionists hope to redirect funds to poverty-related programs. Within the campaign to close Rikers, another view also gained traction, the abolitionist view. The abolitionists saw the closure of Rikers as an opportunity to move in a different direction. Instead of allocating money for new jail construction, they advocated moving funds into a range of programs that would address the underlying poverty-related programs that drove incarceration in New York City: housing, mental health, unemployment, and poor education. Unlike during the years when mass incarceration was unfolding, there was no disagreement about the need for change. There was general agreement that the population of the jail needed to decrease. The issue was by how much. There was also general agreement that much of the funding that went to operating the traditional Rikers Island jail should be reallocated. It was estimated that cutting the cost of the jail would save $1.8 billion per year. The question was, should that money be directed at community investments outside the criminal legal system? Or should it go to new types of initiatives inside jails, like better mental health services, or establishing gender-responsive jails that offer programming and services more in line with the needs of those incarcerated who identify as women, as mothers, as grandmothers? The debates over Rikers Island are not isolated. They echo through struggles over how to change the realities of mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex and communities around the country. Whether in the biggest city in the U.S. or in small rural counties, the debate continues among those fighting for change. How far does that change go? What is our ultimate vision for where that change ends up? Models of justice, page 178. Punishment, revenge, and retribution dominate the U.S. criminal legal system. But recent uprisings against police violence and protests about mass incarceration have inspired activists to reimagine what justice looks like. This has led U.S. organizations and communities to study alternative models such as restorative justice and transformative justice. People in some parts of the world have been using these models for years. Today, grassroots structures in some U.S. communities are following suit and implementing these models to address conflict, violence, harm, and inequity. Sorry, I lost my breath. Retributive justice. Retributive justice centers the idea that who do harm must pay, must face punishment and retribution. This is the foundation of our criminal legal system, which, through the courts, assigns a specific punishment to each offense. This is also the basis of what some refer to as street justice, or an eye for an eye. Retributive justice focuses on the past and acts to rebalance the scales of justice. There is little emphasis on healing or change, and little involvement of the people who are harmed by the crime other than delivering testimony. When retributive justice is carried out by the courts, it is centered on what is legally defined as a crime rather than harm. That is, people are prosecuted for breaking the law rather than harming another person. Communities are made reliant on the state to answer to crimes committed. Blame is placed on the individual rather than the larger system. The individual's criminal record becomes a permanent stigma they must shoulder for life. Restorative justice. Restorative justice centers the idea that a person who does harm must admit their action to the person, community, or organization they have harmed, show some understanding of the impact of that harm, and take some action to restore or compensate for the harm done. For example, in the case of a person who steals $20 from someone, paying back the $20 could be part of restorative justice, but it might also include asking the person to acknowledge that the theft did harm. Restorative justice becomes more complicated when the harm involves great violence, such as a murder, and when the criminal legal system is determined to punish the harm doer. Crucially, unlike retributive justice, restorative justice strives to help heal the person who was harmed. The person who does harm is also given the ability to repair the harm and is not defined solely by their ability to perpetuate harm. Restorative justice involves rethinking the past in order to avoid harm in the future. Transformative justice. Transformative justice centers the idea that harm is often done because of the unjust way that society functions. In transformative justice, we might ask someone to acknowledge that they stole $20, but we may also try to rectify the circumstances that led them to steal that $20, whether it be substance use, unemployment, low wages, or healthcare costs. Transformative justice promotes healing, safety, and accountability, not punishment. Groups that practice transformative justice focus on building the power and capacity to prevent harm before it happens. This means challenging political and economic structures while developing grassroots mutual aid, harm reduction, and conflict de-escalation programs. Quote by Nyako Pippin, currently serving life in Florida. Quote, transformative justice is practice. It's brotherhood and sisterhood. It's fatherhood and motherhood. It's family. It's community. It's culture. It's having the courage to attempt to address the ills of this complex society with love, empathy, and compassion. Close quote. Imagine a world without prisons or jails. Page 180. The U.S. government spends about $80 billion per year on prisons and jails. In 2018, the national average for school spending per pupil was $12,612. The average cost to keep a person in prison for a year was about $30,000. This $80 billion could build 1,000 high schools, construct 320,000 low-income apartments, pay the salaries of 1 million nurses, cover the operating costs of 1.6 million wind turbines. When we look back on the movement to abolish slavery, it seems absurd to think of tinkering with slavery to create a few rules and policies to make for a gentler, kinder enslavement. Yet this is precisely what the dominant thinking is about how we handle prisons and jails. We can't think about abolishing prisons without also addressing other institutions of violence and punishment. As we reimagine a world without prisons, let us also think about other sources of violence in our society. Think, for example, of the amount of resources that are spent on policing, on the military, and on economic activities that degrade the planet. As we imagine a world without prisons, we must also make connections in other ways that punishment, violence, and profiteering endanger lives in communities and consider what needs to be done to build the power to change the entire system. Quote from Fania Davis. If we are to move into a future, we need to we need to do no less than reimagine what it means to be human in relationship to one another and to the earth and her inhabitants. Close quote. Bam. We did it. That's it. That is The Warehouse, a visual primer on mass incarceration by James Kilgore and Vic Liu. Man, so some of those stories are real sad and harrowing, guys, but here we go. And this is a PM Press. If you guys want to Google them, I am. I'm going to look for more literature to read. Independent radical publisher of critically necessary books for tumultuous times. All right. I'm going to look into this. You can pay monthly for kind of a subscription type thing. Very cool. Here's some recommendations. I'm going to just put that up there. A People's Guide to Abolition and Disability Justice. Surviving the Future, Abolitionist Queer Strategies. What else do we have here? Look for Me in the Whirlwind. And Resistance Behind Bars. Looks like they're recommending. And last but not least, The Real Cost of Prisons comics. So, cool. There you go, guys. Damn, this book is so overdue from the library. I gotta return that shit. Yeah, we did it. We finished it. I'm so happy. I'm getting back into my book readings. I haven't done one in about 2 weeks, man. And I write in my journal all the time, like I'm gonna, okay, I'm gonna do this on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays. I'm gonna have an off day on Thursday. But I never make a freaking schedule, man. Like, what's wrong with me? Why don't I do it? So, what's my cat up to? Oh, look, I got 2 cats. My trombone mute's over here. 2 kitties. Awesome, man. So, I really want to play some games now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna end the stream so I can start a new stream with a new title, with a new thumbnail, because people aren't gonna I've pissed off so many people, and like they're not gonna click on the link if it says like book reading. They just want to watch the video games, or you know. I spread myself all over the place. Games, politics, movie reviews, book readings. Yeah. So, okay, so thank you guys for watching the book stream today. And I'm going to play Ground Zero, the survival horror game. It's a love letter to